Hi, I'm Ronnie Meek, and welcome to the Unbeliever's Bible Study, Session 19, Israel's Kings and Two Prophets. The kings of the northern kingdom of Israel were almost exclusively stinkers, in the eyes of the Lord anyway. Their stories are told in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, mostly in Kings. In the world's eyes, they were at times more powerful than the kings of Judah. However, they were ruled by 9 or 10, because one time there was 2 competing dynasties, but they were ruled by 9 or 10 dynasties over a period of just over 200 years. And ultimately, they lost the kingdom over a century before Judah fell. And while Judah was restored shortly after its fall, that was not the case with Israel. It seemed to simply disappear and thus give rise to a lot of interesting theories about the lost tribes of Israel. From the start, they placed political expediency above any consideration of the worship of God. I want to look briefly at 3 of these kings. Jeroboam was the first king after the split came from Judah. He was the leader of the 10 tribes when Rehoboam, Solomon's son, made the foolish decision to answer the people harshly when they came to him asking him to lighten the load after Solomon's death. Jeroboam was afraid that if the people continued to go to Jerusalem to worship, they would also return to the house of David. And so he built 2 golden calf idols, one in the north in Dan and one in the south at Bethel, and told the people, worship there, essentially abandoning the law of Moses. And it was more convenient to go there, and this soon led to them worshiping the Lord in name only, rather than going to Jerusalem to worship the Lord, where they had been instructed to do so. Ahab was Israel's most famous king, to those with the passing knowledge of the Bible anyway. He was a weak man, with the result that he was a wicked man and is largely remembered for those around him. He was Israel's first king to openly embrace the worship of Baal, with no regard for the worship of the Lord. He turned the people away from the Lord and insisted that they worship Baal. Naboth was a man who had a vineyard near Ahab's palace. Ahab tried to buy Naboth's vineyard, but Naboth refused to sell because it was part of his family inheritance. And he felt like it would be an evil thing for him to do so. And so Ahab pouted, went home and pouted, which prompted the entrance of his wife Jezebel into the situation. He said, what has upset you? Well, Naboth won't sell me his vineyard. I've offered him a good price. I've even offered him a better piece of property, but he won't sell it to me. And Jezebel said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And she did. In her way, she instructed the leaders of the town where Naboth lived to hold a feast and invite Naboth, and then hire a couple of scoundrels to sit opposite him and accuse him of blasphemy against God and against the king. And that's exactly what happened. And so they took him out and they stoned him to death. And then Jezebel comes into her husband Ahab and says, don't worry about it. Naboth's dead. And you don't even have to pay him anything. Just go and take the land. Jezebel is probably more famous than Ahab. She was the driving force behind Ahab turning to Baal worship, because that's where she came from. And she had Naboth murdered. She tried to kill the prophet Elijah. She reached her deserved end by being thrown from a palace tower and dying on the plot of ground that had been Naboth's vineyard. Micaiah was a prophet of the Lord, involved in Ahab's demise. Ahab wanted to attack Ramoth-Gilead, and the prophets of Baal were all for it. But because he also wanted Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, to join him in battle, Jehoshaphat insisted that a prophet of the Lord be called. And Ahab said, well, we got one. His name is Micaiah. I don't like him. He never says anything good about me. And Jehoshaphat said, we need to listen. We need to hear from him. And so when Micaiah was brought to Ahab, he was instructed what to say. And Ahab said, shall we go to Ramoth-Gilead and attack? And Micaiah said, yeah, go to Ramoth-Gilead and attack. You'll be successful. And Ahab said, okay, now come on. You know you're supposed to tell me the truth. And Micaiah said, well, I'll tell you the truth. I had a vision. And the Lord said, how will we entice Ahab to go to Ramoth-Gilead to his death? And a spirit came forth and said, I can do it. And the Lord said, well, how will you do it? Well, I will enter his prophets, and I'll be a lying spirit. And the Lord said, oh, that'll work. Go and do it. Well, this didn't sit very well with Ahab. So he had Micaiah imprisoned and went to Ramoth-Gilead. But he did go into battle disguised. There was some uneasiness there. Nevertheless, an arrow found the gap in his armor, and he died at Ramoth-Gilead. One other of the kings of Israel that I'll mention was Jehu. Jehu was a commander under Ahab, but after Ahab died, a prophet of the Lord came and anointed him to be the next king. And he went and he killed Joram, Ahab's son, and Jezebel. He's the one who had her thrown down out of the tower. He also killed the servants of Baal. He was the only king of Israel who made an attempt to return the people to worship of the Lord. But he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, that is, the worship of the golden calves at Dan and Bethel, and require the people to go to Jerusalem. The Lord allowed Jehu's dynasty to continue for 4 generations, and it was the longest dynasty of the kings of Israel. Now to the prophets. Elijah was a prophet of the Lord. During the reign of Ahab, he confronted Ahab on several occasions, but he is mainly noted for the miracles he performed. His most noted miracle was calling fire down out of heaven. But this miracle was actually sandwiched between 2 other significant, though less spectacular miracles. First of all, by the word of the Lord that came through Elijah, he shut up the heavens so it did not rain for over 3 years. No rain for over 3 years. At the end of that time, the Lord told him to go and present himself to Ahab, and he did. And when he presented himself to Ahab, he insisted on a contest between him and the prophets of Baal. Actually, it was between Baal and the Lord. And so they gathered on Mount Carmel, and the people of Israel were there. And Elijah confronted the 450 prophets of Baal in a contest to see whose God would answer with fire from heaven. The Lord won. The prophets of Baal went first, and they spent most of the day crying out to Baal and cutting themselves, and Elijah making fun of them. Hey, maybe you need to speak louder. Maybe he went to sleep. Maybe he's gone on vacation somewhere. No fire came. When it was time for the evening sacrifice, Elijah made a proper altar, put the offering on it, and he had water poured over it. And you say it didn't rain for 3 years. What was water? Well, they were near the sea, and so it was probably seawater. And he called on the Lord to send fire, and fire came down, consumed the offering, consumed the altar, and licked up the water around the altar. It was a pretty dramatic event, and the 450 prophets of Baal were killed. Elijah then prayed, and for the first time in over 3 years, the rain came. Well, in spite of all of this, Jezebel then threatened to kill Elijah. He was just a man. Some great things happened to him, but he was a man, and he was afraid, and he fled to the mountain of the Lord, Horeb, where the Lord sent him back and had him anoint Elisha to succeed him as prophet. He did many other things, but the thing that he is most noted for, aside from calling fire down from heaven, was being taken up into heaven in a chariot of fire. And the only person with him at the time was Elisha, who refused to leave, and so was granted a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Now, Elisha is often confused with Elijah. The names are kind of similar, but they were two different men. Elijah was credited in Scripture with 7 miracles, including raising one person from the dead. Elisha was credited with 14 miracles, and 2 were raised from the dead. Double portion. Elisha did many great things, but the one he's probably best known for involved an important commander from Aram, Israel's enemy. The commander's name was Naaman, and he suffered from leprosy. And he discovered that there was a prophet in Israel who could heal him, and he went to Elisha, and he had all kinds of gifts and everything to give to the prophet, to heal him. And Elisha didn't want any of the gifts. He told him to go and dip 7 times in the Jordan River and be healed. Well, Naaman didn't take that very well, but finally some sense was talked into him and said, well, what have you got to lose? And he went and he dipped 7 times in the Jordan, and the 7th time he came up completely healed. Elisha was a man of humility, and he did not seek financial gain. Even after Naaman's healing, he would not receive any of the gifts. For those somewhat familiar with Scripture, there's one other passage that's quite famous. The king of Aram was frustrated by the fact that the king of Israel seemed to always know his plans. And he thought, well, we've got a leak in our ranks. But he came to find out that Elisha was telling the king of Israel, the king of Aram's plans, even though he wasn't with them. And so he decided to capture Elisha. And he sent his army to Dothan, where Elisha was, to capture him. And one morning, Elisha's servant came in a panic to inform him that the city was surrounded by the army of Aram. And Elisha asked the Lord to open the servant's eyes to see that those who are with us are more than those who are with them. They were delivered from Aram's army, but not by a battle. They were delivered in a most unique way, and I'm not going to tell you what that is. You'll have to read it if you want to know that much. Next time, we're going to look at the kings of Judah. They were often just as bad as their counterparts in Israel, but there were some glowing exceptions, and I hope you'll join me